Thank you very much. Well, welcome everyone to MedMen Live. I'm here with Pim.
MedMen is our show where Andy and I talk about the biggest topics in our industry.
And today's show is special because we're live. We're normally a podcast, but today we're live. This is really happening. We're right here. And cheers. I've even got, oh, you can't even see it. Look at that. But it is a, it's supposed to be a scotch, but.
Is it?
It's actually apple juice, but yeah.
Oh, then I should probably put this one back, but okay.
Cool, good stuff. Well, what are we talking about today, Pim?
Yeah, so today we're talking about MEDDICC, right? As you said, what it really is and why you should care.
Right, we're going to break down what MEDDICC is at a high level and what's behind each element, and more importantly, how they work together to create a complete operating system for revenue teams.
Yeah, so first things first, what is MEDDICC?
Yeah, I think my favorite description of MEDDICC is that it's a framework or methodology that helps sales teams to feel confident about their deals instead of like this feeling of uncertainty. It kind of provides you with a framework that helps you stay on the front foot with things that are important in selling, like building value, engaging with stakeholders, and of course, taking control of the buying process.
That sounds great, Andy. So why don't we dig in a bit? What is the first letter about?
Well, the first letter in the acronym is metrics, but I think it's important to say a lot of people get this wrong about MEDDICC, where they think you kind of have to go each letter one by one throughout your meeting and get all the letters done. That's not how it works. It's a framework, so you apply it accordingly to your deal. But the metrics, this is the quantifiable value that your solution provides to your customers.
Yeah, you made a great point just there. So let's keep that in mind. But right now, metrics specifically, what do people get wrong with metrics?
Where to start, to be honest. The main thing that people get wrong is that they assume that metrics are going to be easy or obvious. Typically, they're not. Typically, our customers, they don't know what our solutions do, right? They don't know how much value is going to be provided from them. And that's actually a good thing. It means you can inspire excitement and uncover pain by doing those things with your customer, uncovering those things with your customer.
So hold on a second there. Something that I want to pick up was the word with that you included there.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Elite sellers, they realize that there is value in taking the customer on the discovery journey, on the value discovery journey.
But it still isn't easy, right?
No, it's not. But that's okay. You know, if it was easy, then every average seller would be doing it. So building metrics is kind of like a progressive, it's an iterative process. And similar to the office you're in, right? Don Draper, he would, come up with a strap line for a brand, but it would take research, it would take discovery, it would take understanding of the company, and then a little bit of a sprinkle of creativity as well.
Yeah, I love that. But how can we, what can we do here to make that process easier then?
Yeah, so we at MEDDICC, we break metrics into three. The first one is M1s, and these are proof points from your existing customer base, right? What value you provide to your existing customers, a real customer, so that when you meet with a brand new prospective customer, you can talk from a perspective of a reference, from a storytelling perspective about the value that your solution brings to your customers. And then the idea is once you found those use cases that they buy into, that they want to learn more about, you evolve the M1, which is about an existing customer of yours, to be an M2, which is about their business. So you're basically starting to evolve the value and the quantification of that value to their own business. And then the M3 is when you actually win the deal and you pass over to your wonderful post-sales team. The M2s become M3s, which is basically the KPIs. It means that we're going to say to the customer, hey, remember in the sales process, we built these metrics that we're all striving to achieve. Now once we're live, we're going to be aiming to achieve them and measure against them.
Yeah, I love that. So let's wrap this up for this element. Ultimately, you were saying that down the lines, those M3s become the building blocks for your M1 repository again.
Correct. Yeah, right.
Love that. So next up is the E, which stands for economic buyer.
Yeah, tell me about the EB.
Yeah, so typically the EB is the overall authority on the deal, right? And the key element is that they typically are the ones that the budget rolls up to, and typically the ones that have the veto power.
Yeah, you seem to say the word typically a lot there, Pim.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason for that, because within our customers, there isn't a role for this, right? There isn't someone with the title of economic buyer, but they do represent a critical part in the deals that we build. So to put simply, if you do not have engagement with the economic buyer, you're basically leaving your deal to chance.
That term, leaving to chance, that doesn't sound like something that's particularly easy to forecast.
No, exactly. That is indeed the case, and this is critical. And we would need like a whole lot more than the say 10-15 minutes that we have left for this session to get into that.
Okay, all right. Well, let's move on. What's the first D in MEDDICC?
So this one stands for decision criteria. And Andy, that's your favorite, right?
I know, like, I shouldn't, it's like having a favorite child, but yes, it's the one that I think it's not necessarily the most important, but it's the one that I think that is the one that can have the most impact if you really use it properly.
Yeah, I mean, champion is obviously the most important. We'll get to that in a bit, but tell everyone why you like this so much.
Yeah, well, it's the difference I see in good and elite. It often revolves around how the seller uses the decision criteria. Let me explain. So good sellers, right? They react to the customer's decision criteria. They seek to understand the customer's decision criteria, and then they adapt their pitch to suit it. Whereas elite sellers, they know that their customers are unlikely to have a rock solid decision criteria. There are just too many vendors. There's too many conflicting approaches. So the customer's very, very unlikely to have a really good idea of what the decision criteria should be. At best, it will be a weak decision criteria, but at worst, it'll be a decision criteria that's been heavily influenced by your competition.
Yeah, and then you would be following your competition's lead, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Andy, this sounds like you need to upgrade, say, your transport from a bicycle, and you start checking out options. And the first place that you get to go to is, say, a Vespa dealership to look at mopeds or scooters, right?
Yeah, and a good Vespa salesperson would probably woo you on like the fuel efficiency and the convenience of being able to park it easily or something like that.
Yeah, but the thing is that anything else you would look at then, after that, you'll judge on the criteria set by that very Vespa salesperson.
Right, even though I have like a family and a dog, right?
Yeah, you do. And the thing here is that unlike buying things in your personal life, often in B2B sales, the customers, to your point just now, they don't know that there are better ways to meet their needs, right? So in B2B, we see it all the time where sellers blindly align to decision criteria that is neither, well, the best for their solution or the customer.
Right. So yeah. So to round off this analogy, that an elite seller would have looked past the decision criteria created by the Vespa salesperson and would have looked to uncover the fact that, you know, me buying a mode of transport, that I have a family and a dog. And if they're really good, they would have done things like perhaps find out the fact that I live in England and, you know, it rains 360 days of the year here and all that kind of stuff. So this not only sets the decision criteria to the strengths, but it lays traps for the Vespa salesperson as well.
Well, hold on a second there. So how do you set traps?
Well, I think people typically, I find I get a lot of questions about traps. People tend to overthink them or misunderstand them. A trap is not it's meant to catch your competition. It's not meant to catch your customer. So the simplest way of laying a trap would be to ensure that one of your differentiators, one of your strengths, becomes a part of the customer's decision criteria.
So space for the dog.
Yeah, exactly. Space for the dog. I mean, imagine trying to, you know, sell a Vespa where there's a criteria where there has to be space for a dog in it, right? And then, but it's not all about differentiation and traps. If you think about it, when an elite seller does this well, the experience for the customer is a consultative one, right? The seller is informing the customer of approaches and areas of value that they haven't probably considered before.
Yeah, that makes sense. That builds credibility.
Yeah, and trust, right?
Yeah. So Andy, moving on here. The next D in MEDDICC is decision process.
Yeah, the most overlooked part of the sales sort of process for me is the actual process itself, or selling, I should say, is the sales process itself. You know, what do people get wrong about the decision process, Pim, and what are the opportunities for people to get it right?
Yeah, I think the main thing that people get wrong with this is that they think it only starts once the customer is, say, in the decision-making mode.
Right, but that's kind of in the name, right? Decision process.
Yeah, well, you're right there. But the issue with it is that sellers think that the decision process purely means the actual vendor selection process, right? And the decision process really starts before the first meeting even. So how do you get a customer to go from a spark of interest caused by something like, say, a great outbound through evaluating your solution through to ultimately buying it?
Yeah. So many sellers don't focus on the process early in deals. They kind of think that's something that comes when, you know, when there's an official opportunity. They overlook getting the customer to the point where they're both in agreement to evaluate the solution, right?
Yeah, so that's a major cause of inertia, right? The customer likes the solution but hasn't advanced to evaluation. So it's either not a priority or it's not urgent, but now come to think of it, probably both.
Yeah, yeah. So the decision process actually begins with us trying to qualify whether there is enough value for it to be worth our while and the customer's while to enter into this evaluation.
Yeah, what we call an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, what about the P in MEDDICC?
Yeah, typically the P doesn't stand for PIM. Maybe that's something we should do, but the P stands for paper process, which is, of course, the process related to NDAs, MSAs, security sign-offs, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Andy, I mean, I think that everybody sort of saw and heard what you did there. Typically,
Yeah. Well, some companies use the P for partners, and that's okay, right? That's one of the great things about MEDDICC. It's kind of open source. You can adapt it to suit your needs.
yeah, I think that if you're a sales leader listening to this and you regularly see deals slip because of things in the paper process, that this should be called out separately. So what are some insights that we can give into the decision and the paper process here?
Yeah, well, process is, for me, like I said it earlier, it's the most overlooked thing in our industry. We see elite sellers typically have about a 30 to 50% higher sales velocity just from the improvements they make to their efficiency of their sales cycles compared to average sellers alone. So it's pretty big.
Yeah, well, nicely positioning some metrics there, I see. So what is a common difference you see between, say, good sellers and elite sellers?
Yeah, well, good sellers tend to think about the decision of the paper process as like a checkbox exercise, right? And they find out the steps and then they check them off. And they don't tend to attach urgency or dependency to the events. They don't tend to sort of time bound them. The customer sort of vaguely knows there's some reason why this should be a priority, but they don't implicitly feel it. An elite sellers, they do things like the following. They do things like they've qualified and tested their champion. They've aligned the deal with their champion's vested interest. They'll have a deep understanding of all of the steps to the signature. They'll have contingency plans of, if someone goes on holiday or vacation or ill, what happens then? All those types of different things. They'll have a deep understanding with the customer of the value their solution provides and how much value is being lost every single day that it passes by without them using it. They will have also ensured that the customer has skin in the game tied to the timeframes that they have both mutually agreed.
Yeah, I mean, there's no arguing with that. That does sound elite.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for hours about this stuff, but we're on a time limit, so let's move on. Tell us about pain, Pim.
Yeah. Well, I think that most sellers know what pain is, right? But all too often we see pain as like a one-time thing that is basically being identified and again, checking off.
Yeah, there's that checklist mentality again, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This is one of the major mistakes people make with MEDDICC is they think of it as a checklist. I said it before, right? And this is bad because it means you're not only using MEDDICC retrospectively, meaning you're doing everything after the event.
Yeah. Yeah, so not only do sellers get less value, but they don't usually like to, use it either, right?
Yeah, when you use it like that, it's not a great experience for anyone. So tell me, Pim, why identifying pain isn't enough. Sorry.
Yeah, identifying pain isn't enough because it doesn't necessarily do much for the customer, right? So except show them something that they probably already knew. And so without indicating to this customer how much value they get from solving it, it just means very little.
Yeah, I think a lot of sellers assume that just by identifying the pain, it will make the customer want to fix it. But what should a seller do once they've identified pain with their customer?
Well, then sellers need to indicate to the customer just how much pain is impacting their business.
You mean like a business case?
I mean, kind of, although this can start at a higher level, right? So we can use metrics that we just mentioned before and M2s to indicate to the customer just how much the pain is costing them.
But does this drive urgency?
Not unless the customer is highly aware of the pain. So if you want to take control of how the customer feels about the pain, then you need the third eye in how we see pain, which is implicate.
Okay, let's do an example for this bit. I'd love you to give an example of how pain would look when it's comparing sort of implicating pain versus if you just identify and indicate it to the customer.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're both car guys, right? So I'll give an example about a car. So imagine that You are driving your car anywhere, and the oil light comes on, and anyone on this session can imagine this. So
Yeah.
that is basically you seeing the oil light, you identifying the pain, right?
Right. Yeah, and whether I do anything about that will depend on, you know, my personality and, you know, how well I understand warning lights, right?
Yeah, that's right. So say that you have a passenger, and that passenger is seeing it too, and this passenger says to you, "Oh, I see your oil light is on. You should get that checked out because it could really cost you big time to get it fixed if you run out of oil." And this is basically being the pain indicated to you.
Right. So the difference there is that one is me just seeing it. The other is that someone's actually saying, you know, this is going to cost you this much, a bit like kind of like what would go into like a high level business case. And yeah, I am more likely to take action once I see the numbers. I think that's kind of the thought behind the business case.
Probably.
Yeah, but not maybe not massively so.
Yes, yeah, it may not be urgent, right?
You know, I've had warning lights on in my car for like literally months before I've just
Oh,
kind of
are you like that? Yeah. Okay. So imagine that this specific passenger then is an expert in car mechanics, right? And they start asking you questions about your maintenance regime. They're making you realize that you aren't doing a great job with it. Well, it sounds, Andy, like you aren't, right? So this is how you start to become implicated by the pain. And I, even worse, your passengers start sharing concern that your car could be in really bad shape because of that poor maintenance regime, right? And they start to ask you questions about the actual importance of your car to you specifically. They ask you like, hey, but how are you going to get to work? What would you do without it? Would you hire a car? And then how much would that cost you? And then that would even be on top of the repair that potential damage will be doing, right? Running out of oil.
yeah. So you're basically saying I'm going to have to take the bus. That's how it
It
makes me
sounds
feel.
like you will be on the bus, Andy, but an elite seller isn't finished with you there yet. So they spot pain in the same way that, well, basically a shark spots a blood inside the ocean. And once they find that, they are biting down to it, right? The pain has only just begun there.
Why do I feel so impacted by this story?
I guess you're becoming implicated, and the elite seller in this scenario is going to ask you questions about the bus, right? Do you like traveling on the bus?
No, I do not like traveling on the bus. I don't like crowds.
You don't?
No, they make me anxious. I always feel like I'm going to catch like a cold or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So we would follow this route of questioning to get you to talk about, say, your kids, right? How they would catch a cold from you. They'll be stuck home ill. You will be without a car, and may even add a little bit of the inconvenience about the bus there.
Stop it. It's killing me.
Yeah, well, there we have it, right? This is really the difference between just identifying and maybe indicating, and then also implicating the pain. So you weren't that bothered when we were just indicating it, and well, look at where we are right now.
Yeah, when you implicated it, it was all in the what we would call discovery questions.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing to put across here is that those discovery questions, you couldn't have scripted those, right? You had to be actively listening to what my scenario was. And when, like you said, you used the analogy of the shark in the water, there was a bit of pain and you went after it. So I think that's so points to really the importance of listening. And then also not just sort of identifying the pain, but really pushing to implicate on me. And it just made, as I said, it made me just wish you'd stop.
Yeah, I think that one more thing here is that it's about pain. It's important to remember that this needs to be not implicated once, but constantly, right? And I mean, it won't stay as severe in the customer's mind if you don't do that. Nor will new stakeholders that can come into the picture along the way feel that implicated unless you implicate them, essentially.
Yeah. So like using your analogy, it's a bit like if I didn't drive my car for a while, then the oil light wouldn't, or it was intermittently on or something like that, then I would lose the urgency because I wouldn't be reminded of that, the implication of the pain. Or like, if someone else was driving my car, but they didn't see the light come on, they're not going to be implicated in the pain because I was some weeks or months ago. I think that's kind of the point you're making, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, we could, like you said before, go on for hours about this, but let's make sure that we move on to the next element here, which is champion. And Andy, you are a little bit maybe even famous nowadays for saying no champion, no deal, or big champion, big deal. What do you mean by that?
I have a pretty controversial view here, which is that if you're selling without a champion, then you're not selling.
So what are you doing then?
Your order taking. Let me put it like this. What are the things that you think a good or elite salesperson does with a deal?
Let's see. They build value. They are broadly across different stakeholders, and they understand and align to the customer's process.
Yep, I agree with that. But if you don't have a champion, how are you going to get the information to build value? Who is going to spread the information, the details of that value to other stakeholders? How will you engage with those other stakeholders? How do you understand what the process is, let alone take control of the process, right? With no champion, how?
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So what does a champion have to have here?
Yep, three things. They have to have a vested interest in your success. They have to be selling internally for you. And last but not least, they have to have power and influence. That's a non-negotiable trait of a champion.
Okay, and now a bit of a different turn. So there are things coming up, people saying like, hey, a champion isn't important anymore, or that it doesn't kind of exist in modern day selling. What's the take on that?
No successful salesperson is actually saying that, right? It's just the self-professed gurus, the future of sales. Another way to look at it is to ask yourself, your best deal, everyone listening to this, your best deal, the one that you talk about in job interviews, the one you're really proud of, the one that you were the change maker. There may have been a situation where the customer had no budget, or they didn't even know they needed your solution, right? Or maybe you came late to the opportunity and your competitor was ahead of you, but you still won the deal. I guarantee you, when you're thinking of that deal where you were the real change maker, one of the things you did that made you successful was to build a champion, a person that was kind of like a force multiplier for all the good selling you do. That is the power of a champion.
Yeah, we as sellers need to be change makers, right? It's most definitely the case in my mind here.
And the same for me. All right, one letter left, Pim. What is it?
Yeah, one letter left. It's another C. It's for competition.
And how do we define competition in MEDDICC?
Yeah, so let's get into it. So competition is any person or anything that is competition with your deal for like the same budget or resources, right? So it's basically anything that can slow your deal down or stop it altogether. And if we break that down a little bit, it's not just your rivals, right? Because that might be what we think about first and foremost, but it's also the things that a customer might think about for a self-build as a second option there, or like another initiative that is completely different from the project that you are trying to sell on, or inertia, or doing nothing.
Yeah, I've lost more deals to inertia than any of those other combined, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a real killer, right?
Yep. So Pim, in the interest of time, can you use an example to show how an elite seller would approach competition? Perhaps let's use the platinum sponsor. You are selling on behalf of our friends at Sales Loft. So use that as an example.
Okay. So I'm selling at Sales Loft, and I'm selling to, say, a sales leader who uses Salesforce, and her SDR team does mostly outbound, right? Mostly outbound sales motion, and they are considering how they can make their work more productive. So their options along the lines of what we just said are basically going with Sales Loft or one of their rivals. The second one, the self-build, would be working with the RevOps team to build something inside of Salesforce. The third one would be to use the resources to do something else, do like a sales training, scope, whatever. And the last one, the inertia, the let the things stay the way they are for now.
Right. When you break it down like that, you can already see how much more effective your strategy is going to be than the typical kind of competition strategy, which just focuses on your rivals, right?
Yeah, I think that maybe earlier in our career, or even now, sometimes we are still there. We focus on the rivals first and foremost, and then when we end up in a situation where we lose a deal to inertia, we just wonder what happened.
Yeah, we won the battle, but not the war, right? So help us finish up this example. How do you win this one? What's your strategy here?
I mean, shouldn't be a surprise here, but it's all about identifying value that shows the solution. Well, Sales Loft in this example is better than any of the other options we just mentioned.
Right. And how would you do that?
Okay, so we have a couple of seconds left here, right? I'm gonna make this quick. So full circle, we'd use M1s to inspire the value that we can provide. We would work on building M2s with this sales leader to showcase that value. We'd underpin that value by ensuring it aligns to the unique value we can provide. And that, well, not only goes into the customer's decision criteria, but it also sets the traps for the competition that you were alluding to earlier on.
Right. ouch. Can you imagine trying to compete in a scenario like that, where your competition's solution becomes the customer's de facto vision of what good looks like, right? That's the gold standard, that's the elite standard, right? Well, that unfortunately is all we have time for today. Thank you for tuning in to literally the very first MedMen Live, maybe the first of many, hopefully. Of course, it's only been a super high level look at MEDDICC. We tried to give like a sort of dip of a toe in the water and show some sort of ways it can really help. But Pim, if people want to know more about MEDDICC and us, what should they do?
They should get in touch with us. So there's a link to our LinkedIn page in the chat, if I'm not mistaken, put there by Jess or Beth. Just get in touch and yeah, let's connect.